Jurassic Park.
It's Steven Spielberg's mega blockbuster that completely changed the movie industry forever. How did the famous director approach and execute a production that not only turned out a large number of film fans' favorite motion picture, but also achieved the most photorealistic dinosaurs to date? It's a story that's filled with ambition, adaptation, innovation, and a pure love for the featured creatures. Jurassic Park was also released during the most important year of Spielberg's career. He showed an almost superhuman dedication to quality, juggling his biggest silver screen adventure with his most heavy and dramatic cinematic effort up to that point. 1993 was also right smack in the middle of another new era at Universal. There's a lot to break down.
Hold on to your butts.
Take a ride into the prehistoric jungles of Jurassic Park. Scottish industrialist John Hammond has taken years of his life and millions from his fortune to create the ultimate theme park off the coast of Costa Rica. The stars of said destination are resurrected dinosaurs. Genetic material from the extinct animals were extracted from amber-preserved ancient mosquitoes. Hammond's team reconstructed the dino's genome with the help of frog DNA. Now, the species that once ruled the Earth walk alongside human beings for their entertainment. Doctors Alan Grant, Ellie Sadler, and Ian Malcolm are brought to Isla Nublar to witness Hammond's miraculous accomplishment before the park's grand opening. Alan and Ellie marvel at the beings they've been studying their whole lives, while simultaneously questioning Hammond's ethics with Malcolm. John's grandchildren, Lex and Tim Murphy, are also on the island and join the doctors on their tour. Meanwhile, greedy computer programmer Dennis Nedry underhandedly plans on selling dinosaur embryos to Hammond's competition. He begins enacting this scheme when a storm rolls in, and he cuts power to some of the park's automated systems. Stranded near the T-Rex enclosure, the tourists soon find themselves face to face with beasts of a bygone age. The reign of MCA as Universal's parent company was a long and prosperous one. Over a near 30-year period, they pumped out all-time classics and grew Universal Studios' theme park into a rival for Disney, first by resuscitating tours of their film lot, then by adding rides and attractions based on their intellectual property. In June of 1990, they launched Universal Studios Florida as another amusement getaway for fans and families, while also expanding their footprint in the television and film production business. Famous to my generation, this is where Nickelodeon Studios was located and shot many of its programs throughout the 90s. Looking to keep up with mammoth mergers of the era, such as Sony's acquisition of Columbia Pictures in 1989, MCA president Lou Wasserman sold his company to Matsushita Electrical Industrial Company of Japan, better known as Panasonic. The deal was finalized in November of 1990 for $6.6 billion. Matsushita's main rival was Sony, so purchasing an American film studio seemed like a tit-for-tat move. Their ownership didn't last nearly as long as MCA, but with Wasserman and Sid Sheinberg remaining in charge of day-to-day operations, Universal still released flicks like Kindergarten Cop, Cape Fear, Scent of a Woman, and the live-action Flintstones movie. With apparent buyer's remorse, it wasn't long before another changeover took place, which we'll cover on the next State of the Studio. When it comes to the creation of the novel that spawned the film franchise, late author Michael Crichton said the following on his official website. I wrote a screenplay about cloning a pterodactyl from fossil DNA in 1983, but the story wasn't convincing. I worked on it for several years since, trying to make it more credible. Finally, I decided on a theme park setting and wrote a novel from the point of view of a young boy who was present when the dinosaurs escaped. I then sent the book to the usual people who read my first drafts. They were all in agreement. They hated Jurassic Park. I wrote another draft. They hated that one too, just as strongly as the one before. Whatever I had done in the latest draft, it hadn't helped. I wrote another draft, but the result remained the same. Finally, one of the readers said that they were irritated with the story because they wanted it to be from an adult point of view, not a kid point of view. They said, I want this to be a story for me, meaning for an adult. So I rewrote it as an adult story, and then everybody liked it. In 1990, Crichton and Steven Spielberg were going back and forth on a screenplay that would eventually evolve into the TV series ER. Spielberg asked the author if he was working on any new books, so Crichton told him of the concept for Jurassic Park. The director's interests were immediately piqued. He read through manuscript pages and became further fascinated by the idea. Before anything was official, Spielberg started storyboarding scenes from the book that he wanted to adapt in movie form. A bidding war then transpired between several studios. They each had big-name directors attached, but it was Spielberg and Universal who won out. Everything was set before Crichton's book even hit stores. The author was able to take first crack at the screenplay. He took notes from Spielberg and produced several drafts, but his goal was really only to get it to the point where it could be handed off to another writer for polishing. At the time, Spielberg was working on Hook, and that film's co-writer, Malia Scotch-Marmo, was hired on to continue Crichton's work. She tried redeveloping the story from scratch to focus more on the aspects Spielberg preferred from the novel, but the director ultimately didn't like the shape her version of the screenplay was taking. David Koepp was then brought in and reportedly took a lot of time reading the book and avoiding other versions of the script before writing his own. Spielberg continued to mold the story with the writer. He also involved Scotch-Marmo in the process by giving her detailed input on the new drafts. Much of Koepp's focus was on the characterization of the leads. It was important to Spielberg to have a sense of lightness, humor, and wit to his protagonists. This element would be enhanced during filming, but Spielberg was satisfied with Koepp's script as production started to heat up. In interviews, Spielberg said the best way to approach directing the movie was to be a kid. He loved dinosaurs as a child, his favorite being the Triceratops. The goal was to construct the film for others who felt the same way about these gargantuan, almost mythic creatures. But he didn't want to make a pure monster movie. He felt the book went deeper into realistically examining the possibility of dinosaurs returning and the implications of that choice by mankind. The dinos were to be treated as animals, which dictated how they were going to be portrayed and designed.
What do they got in there, King Kong?
The director was highly inspired by 1933's King Kong. Actress Fay Wray was brought to set, those famous gates evoked the ones from the '33 film, and the initial idea for the effects were similar. He wanted to recreate the feeling he had when he first saw Kong battle the T-Rex. Even 60 years later, it was still the high watermark for what he hoped to achieve with Jurassic Park. At first, Spielberg was planning on the dinosaur effects being done with a combination of full-size animatronics and the stop-motion or go-motion technique. Believability was paramount to the director. After seeing some of Phil Tippett's early tests, he was impressed by recent advancements, but not 100% convinced it was going to work. The movements were still a bit too jerky for his liking. It was then Dennis Muren and the team at Industrial Light and Magic suggested making the dinos primarily computer-generated. Spielberg was shown skeletal animations of a herd of gallimimuses running across the terrain and was blown away. But it wasn't until the director saw a more fleshed-out render of a T-Rex chasing them that he became confident this was the right call. ILM had just been working on the famous T-1000 liquid metal effect from Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Even with the advances made to create those elements of that character, a fully skinned giant animal was a whole different challenge. We were only a handful of years removed from the first fully computer-generated character in a motion picture. It appeared in the Spielberg executive-produced Young Sherlock Holmes from 1985. On April 20th, 1992, it was announced that the dinosaurs were officially going digital. Phil Tippett and his team were already working on the stop-motion scenes. They were significantly let down by the decision.
We're out of a job. Don't you mean extinct?
That wasn't exactly the case. Spielberg still utilized the stop-motion team for detailed animatics of certain sequences, like the T-Rex attack and kitchen scene. They're available on the Blu-ray, and I gotta say, they look great. These animatics were based on Spielberg's extensive storyboards and also helped the CG artists with certain movements and lighting on the dinosaurs, proving invaluable to the finished product. A new tool called the Dinosaur Input Device was created as well. It was basically a motion capture mechanism that transferred the stop-motion team's puppeteered movements into the computer. The DID kind of reminded me of Jim Henson's digital performance system, first developed in the late 80s, except the HDPS transferred puppeteer movements into computer-animated objects in real time. The late Stan Winston and his team were tasked with constructing the full-size dinos. They started with small maquettes to get a sense of the design Spielberg wanted after detailed concept art was drawn up. From there, they built a few more models, gradually increasing in stature until the T-Rex was as big as it is in the film. The director also consulted legendary Disney Imagineer Bob Gurr for advice. Gurr was responsible for the giant King Kong animatronic at Universal Studios Hollywood at the time. Rexy was a one-of-a-kind machine that was meticulously assembled and worked great. However, it went through a few troubles by the time they got to production, which we'll go over in a minute. Spielberg's aim was to combine all available technologies to create the most realistic-looking dinosaurs possible, and he succeeded while ushering in a new age of computer animation in film. Most, if not all, of Jurassic Park's effects hold up better than many of today's films. Some of that has to do with the amount of time the animators at ILM had to work on the over 30-year-old movie. Nowadays, ridiculous deadlines and massively overworked and underpaid VFX artists have led to sometimes inferior-looking products. Keeping the beasts appearing as accurate as possible to what was known at the time was the job of paleontologist advisor Jack Horner. He was constantly consulted in everything from concept art to the final designs. Horner made sure to push the predominant theory, just as the original book did, of birds evolving from dinosaurs instead of reptiles. He would crack down on anything that suggested otherwise. This was the case in the animatic for the kitchen scene, where Phil Tippett's team added thin, protruding tongues from the raptors. The human cast of the film weren't exactly the stars of the show, but they were essential to give viewers people to care about and create tension with the dino attacks. A few more well-known actors were up for lead roles, but Spielberg didn't want big celebrities to distract from the spectacle. He focused on getting good performers over big-name talent. Ultimately, Sam Neill, Laura Dern, Jeff Goldblum, Richard Attenborough, Joseph Mazzello, Ariana Richards, Wayne Knight, and emerging superstar Samuel L. Jackson headed up the cast. The tropical location of Isla Nublar described in the novel was an important element for the story. Spielberg needed a real location for a large portion of the film. He originally wanted to shoot in Costa Rica, but it proved too challenging for production. They decided on the Kauai Island in Hawaii, as it had everything they needed and wouldn't exactly be a hassle for the cast and crew to spend their off time in. Nature had other plans, though. Jurassic Park started shooting on Kauai in August of 1992. All things considered, things were going quite well until the winds shifted, literally. 3 weeks into production, on September 11, 1992, Hurricane Iniki made landfall on the island. The Category 4 storm decimated everything in sight and became the most powerful and among the most costly natural disasters in Hawaiian history. The cast and crew holed up in the ballroom of their hotel until it passed over, but the damage done outside was devastating. Some members of the crew later helped clear roadways as the island began its long recovery. With the hurricane happening toward the end of the production's time in Kauai, they soon headed back to the States to continue. Large sets were constructed inside for scenes that required more control of the environment. This included the kitchen sequence with the raptors, which, among the effects listed earlier, had crew members in suits for a few shots. But the most important and complicated of these scenes was the T-Rex attack. The puppeteers operating Rexy are called the unsung heroes of Jurassic Park by Steven Spielberg. They brought the character to life with precise movements that had to be rehearsed ahead of time. The animatronic maneuvered with a shocking amount of fluidity, since every little detail of its build was fine-tuned to perfection. Then Spielberg said he wanted rain. Rexy wasn't made with that in mind. It was unknown if the animatronic could withstand being drenched, but they tried it anyway. The material acting as the dinosaur's skin started to absorb the water en masse. It added hundreds of pounds to the mechanical monster, which started disrupting those finely tuned details inside. The Tyrannosaurus still seemed to function most of the time, but there were points where it would freeze up, quivering as if out in the cold. The crew had to remove as much water as they could in between takes to make sure their star acted as advertised. I'm sure that was a major challenge on set, since it was a last-minute call by Spielberg, but the rain absolutely made that scene. It also hid any imperfections in Rexy's CG counterpart. One of my favorite shots in the film is the famous water vibration. Spielberg got the idea of the T-Rex's stomps causing a disturbance in the cup of liquid by blasting earth, wind, and fire in his car. He noticed the heavy baseline shaking his rearview mirror and imagined concentric circles indicating the arrival of his dangerous dinosaur. This was much more difficult to pull off than one would think. Special effects worker Michael Lantieri couldn't figure out how to make it happen for weeks, Unexpectedly, he discovered he could create the desired ripples and not disturb the surrounding area by playing a guitar at the right frequency. On the day of the shot, Lantieri fed a guitar string through the car down to the ground. He had one of his crew members underneath the vehicle plucking the string, and it worked like a charm. Spielberg and company continued to improvise when needed and soon got used to shooting with the digital effects in mind. They came up with ideas on the spot of how to implement the CGI and even relatively comfortably changed the original ending to incorporate more. Principal photography wrapped up 12 days ahead of schedule in November of 1992.
We've been in pre-production for 50 million years on this movie.
Cutting the film was an interesting challenge for veteran editor Michael Kahn. They had over 50 shots where CG would be implemented that he and Spielberg had to leave empty. This was a new method at the time, and Kahn remarked how strange it felt. After the film was picture-locked, it was sent over to ILM to do their thing. The animators went above and beyond to get the movements of the creatures right. They took mime classes and later recorded themselves running and acting like dinosaurs for reference. Footage of real animals also came in handy as they completed such high-quality work that it affected how future blockbusters were made. While Steven Spielberg was shooting Schindler's List in Krakow, Poland, he was having satellite meetings and approving VFX shots for Jurassic Park. On the weekends, he'd sometimes travel to Paris to work on the sound mix. If he had the choice, Spielberg admitted he wouldn't have mixed those two projects, later comparing it to a bipolar experience. The whole year felt like a fever dream. He used every ounce of craft for Jurassic Park and every bit of intuition on Schindler's List. The final months of post-production on his dinosaur movie were a blur. He doesn't remember much from that time period, but in the end, his work paid off. Both pictures are highlights of his filmography for totally different reasons, and 1993 turned out to be perhaps the best year of his career. One of the things Spielberg missed out on because of his other commitment was the recording of the musical score. It was the first time this happened, and composer John Williams was only able to preview some of it for the director before he left for Krakow. Just about every film fan is familiar with John Williams' Jurassic Park theme. He made a concerted effort to insert a sense of wonder, reverence, and even religiosity into it. The composer likened part of his music to entering a grand church for the first time. But I also appreciate how they held back from using music in some of the bigger, tension-filled moments. The T-Rex attack, for example, is driven by the visuals and sound design alone. Rexy's roar is layered with crocodiles, lions, and baby elephants. Her footsteps were falling redwood trees. Dolphins and walruses were used for the raptors, and a bowling alley was the basis for falling bones. The sound department went out and recorded tons of new noises to employ here, and it's a massive part of the effectiveness of the final film. Jurassic Park was the first major movie to invest in digital theater systems, or DTS Inc. This was another industry leap forward, with multi-channel audio becoming the norm in theaters across the world and on home video releases. Promotional tie-ins for Jurassic Park were plentiful. McDonald's, Kenner, Sega, and many more companies all featured items hyping its release. The poster for the film, designed by John Alvin, is simple and intriguing. It's another to throw on the list of the most iconic ever. Jurassic Park was ready for the world, but how ready were audiences for this prehistoric adventure? Nedry is killed by a Dilophosaurus before he can escape the park with his stolen embryos. Grant, Malcolm, the Murphys, and lawyer Donald Gennaro are also attacked by a Tyrannosaurus Rex when it breaks out of the enclosure. Gennaro is killed, Malcolm is injured, and Grant, Lex, and Tim flee into the jungle to survive. Malcolm is soon found and brought back to headquarters by Ellie and Hammond's employee, Robert Muldoon. As the Jurassic Park team tries to restore power to the island, velociraptors emerge as a deadly threat and kill several staffers. Eventually, our heroes are cornered in the museum building, about to become lunch for a pair of raptors. Just before they're pounced upon, the escaped T-Rex intervenes and kills the smaller animals, giving Ellie, Alan, and the Murphys enough time to get away. They fly off in a helicopter with Hammond and Malcolm, leaving behind the perilous, yet breathtaking, Jurassic Park. On June 11, 1993, moviegoers were introduced to something they had never quite seen the likes of before. Jurassic Park exploded immediately. It broke records right off the bat with a $50 million opening weekend. Audiences were returning to theaters multiple times to see it and reacted loudly to all the big moments. One of those moments featured the accidentally heroic return of the T-Rex to save the day. As epical a climax as it is, Rexy's comeback wasn't the original plan. As seen in storyboards on the Blu-ray, the first finale had our protagonists barely keeping their distance from the raptors with the help of a condor. The predator hangs from the lift high off the ground in the museum. Dr. Grant smashes the raptor into the T-Rex skull and its skeleton collapses with the living dino in its mouth. Grant then lowers the condor and kills the carnivore. A second raptor shows up, but the storyboards finish there. After seeing how well the Tyrannosaurus attack came together, Spielberg was convinced bringing her back would get the best reaction. They adjusted while shooting the scene and created a sequence that would have been impossible just a few months earlier. Some of the VFX artists didn't know if it would make sense within the bounds of the story since the T-Rex didn't make any noise before entering the frame, but entertainment topped logic here. The featured dinosaur's roar as that banner fell made for an incredible cinematic moment. Critics universally praised the film, and audiences kept on showing up. Spielberg eventually surpassed his own box office record held by 1982's E.T. the Extraterrestrial, and Jurassic Park became the one true Rex of cinema. It would hang on to the crown of highest grossing movie ever until Titanic came along a few years later. At the 66th Academy Awards, the blockbuster was only nominated for 3 Oscars. It captured the gold for Best Sound Effects Editing, and of course, Best Visual Effects. I'm half surprised it didn't get noms for Best Picture and Best Music, but with Schindler's List also in contention, the Academy may have wanted to avoid Spielberg overload. His second film of 1993 was nominated for 12 statues and took home 7, including Best Picture and Director, bringing the total Oscars for Spielberg films that night to a whopping 10. If you're watching this video, I don't have to tell you, Jurassic Park launched an entire franchise. A sequel novel by the original author with additional spin-offs, 6 sequel films including the latest, Jurassic World Rebirth, a pair of short films, animated series, multiple video games, theme park attractions, and a whole ton of merchandise follow. All that said, nothing has ever really come close to the original for what seems like most fans. Jurassic World from 2015 did huge business, but there's nothing quite like the mania the first film created in the early to mid-1990s. Not that I was really cognizant of all that myself until a little bit later. I was only 4 years old when the first Jurassic Park movie hit theaters. I do have early memories of t-shirts and posters, and like most kids, I was a huge dinosaur fan. I recall one year I asked for Jurassic Park on VHS for a birthday gift, I believe. My great-aunt got it for me, and I can still remember being too scared to put it on. I must have been about 5 or 6 at that point. Strange the emotions that stick with you. It wasn't until Jurassic Park 3 that I finally saw one of the films in theaters. I thought it was pretty fun as a 12-year-old. Since then, I've seen all the Jurassic World movies on their initial theatrical runs and finally went back to watch The Lost World semi-recently. I like the series in general, but I'm far from a super fan. I don't have the experience of seeing the original in theaters and having my mind blown like kids a few years older than me did. Even though I wasn't exactly a part of that first wave of viewers, I can still appreciate Jurassic Park for the ways it pushed the industry forward and created a pure spectacle. Without a doubt, it's the best of the series and still holds up over 3 decades on. One thing I noticed on this last rewatch was just how amazing Jeff Goldblum was. I know, this isn't breaking news, but he's got enough charisma to fill an empty Jeep.
See, here I am now by myself, talking to myself. That's chaos theory.
What a presence! He's the most quotable character in a film where Sam Jackson says, "Hold on to your butts" twice. That's gotta count for something.
Hello? Yes?
I really hate that man.
I also picked up on Richard Attenborough's inconsistent Scottish accent. It's prominent in some scenes, but morphs into a proper English delivery in others. Sometimes it shifts in the same scene. After a quick Google search, I'm far from the first person to notice. John Hammond was a very enjoyable character for me this time around. I know he's more of a villain in the novel, but the Jurassic Park creator is akin to a misguided dreamer here. His quiet exchange with Laura Dern's Dr. Sattler was maybe my favorite scene.
I wanted to show them something that wasn't an illusion. Something that was real. Something that they could see and touch. The name not devoid of merit.
The John Williams score there, subtly playing up Hammond's tragic idealism, was expertly done as well. The more I watch that scene, the more I like it. It's easy to point out the greatness of the effects in the T-Rex attack sequence or the fantastic tension in the kitchen scene. I was just more sucked in by the characters this time around. Ellie and Alan's relationship, or lack thereof, has apparently divided viewers, but I always assumed they were a couple. The arc of Sattler wanting to start a family and Grant not liking kids is pretty well laid out. Kind of a bummer they were never able to start that family together as the series went on. Jurassic Park was the right movie at the right time, with technical innovations and a focus on epic visuals that really did change the way Hollywood does business. We're still feeling the effects of it today. Its mighty roar will continue to echo through future generations. Thanks to the Blu-ray extra features, documentaries, and online fan base for all the details provided in this video. Make sure you check out the Walter Culture YouTube channel for more content, and stick with me inside the gates of Jurassic Park. Next time on Juniversal, we go on a certified adventure.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.